Hey gang, welcome back to another video. So this week I'm dipping back into the pool of obscure Star Wars communication props, but this time it's from everyone's favorite card player, gambler, and scoundrel, Lando Calrissian. So let's get into it. Okay, first things first, I have to acknowledge that I am currently obsessed with comlink props and have a plan to make a whole series of them. So I appreciate you bearing with me while I work through my favorites. And this one is at the top of that list. But unfortunately, it's made from parts that are nearly impossible to find, so I got to 3D modeling it based on what I could find online. This prop is almost completely made from a General Control Company electrical switch, whose patent was filed January 13, 1945. So as of the time of this video, it's an 81-year-old piece of technology from a galaxy far, far away. Now, using both the patent drawing as well as a few threads on the Replica Prop Forum, I was able to piece together a model that may not be 100% accurate down to the millimeter, but more importantly, has the right profile, as well as some of the hallmarks of the actual items it's replicating. So when it felt like I'd covered most of the key elements of what makes this prop look the way it does, it was time to export my files from Fusion, import them into Chitubox so that I could prep them to be printed in resin. For small props like this, SLA printing is ideal because it can capture all of the small details, like the knurling on the handle, and saves a ton of time on sanding, although not always. Once I had the parts off the printer and all of the supports removed, I still had a bit of cleanup to do before I could move on. Now there's almost always some small nibs on the parts that had printer supports that will need to be sanded flush, which is something I typically do immediately after washing the prints and before the curing process. But there's always a little bit more to be done with a higher grit sandpaper to help get rid of any of the scratch marks left behind after that initial sanding. For these parts, I'm using a 600 grit sanding stick, and in no time they're looking much more uniform and ready for paint. While I'm making my way through the parts that need cleanup, I'm taking the time to check the fit on all of the parts, since there's almost always some tolerance issues on 3D printed parts. This is the best time of the build to address these fit issues, since they'll only get tighter as primer and paint gets added to the parts. In the case of this rod piece, I could tell that it wasn't likely to fit once painted, so I grabbed my drill, chucked it up, and removed a bit more material until the parts had a better fit. And now that everything's been sanded, I'll do a quick full assembly, and once everything fits, I can finally move on to paint. Usually I'd give all the parts a wipe down with a tack cloth to remove any surface dust, but unfortunately I ran out, and so this microfiber towel will have to do in a pinch. Any dust on the parts at this stage are likely to show up in the final paint, so getting the parts cleaned is a requirement. With that out of the way, I grabbed some double-faced carpet tape and applied it to a few pieces of cardboard to keep my parts from rolling away, and then I could get to applying a coat of primer. Now, based on the parts and how snug the fit is, using this double thick primer wasn't the smartest move, but it's what I had on hand. If I were to do this again, I'd use a standard primer that didn't go on so thick to save me the trouble of having to sand most of these parts down later so that they'd fit back together. When the primer was dry, I grabbed this Montana Gold Sahara Beige, which was the closest color of spray paint that I had that was similar to what was used on the original prop, and got down to painting the main body pieces. If you're using Montana paints, it's important to remember that they're low-pressure cans. So you need to apply your paint from much closer than your standard hardware store cans, otherwise you risk the solvents flashing off before the paint hits the surface and leaving behind a dusty finish. These parts got set aside to dry, and then I could black out all of the parts that would either stay black or eventually get painted in a metallic finish. After about 30 minutes, my base paint was dry and I could get to making these parts look more like metal. For this, I used Duplicolor Silver Mica spray paint, and when I had good coverage, they were set out in the sun to dry for an hour, just to be safe, since metallics are notoriously finicky and susceptible to fingerprints. While I wait, the front side of this prop has a bit of mesh inset into the opening. More specifically, the mesh from a 1963 Dansette Gem portable radio. But since I don't have one of those, and all of the ones that are for sale are UK based, I found some tight weave mesh and made myself a small template and cut a piece with a pair of tin snips. This piece has a nice friction fit, so I won't worry about gluing it in place. Plus, the other parts of the electrical switch will keep it from going anywhere. With the mesh out of the way, I can get to gluing up the main body of this prop. But before I do, I'll scratch the surfaces to be glued with an old X-Acto knife so that the glue has something to bond to. Then I added in a few drops of CA glue and put the pieces in position. Off camera, I did a second test fit of some of the parts only to have them get stuck in position. So these two pieces are in place and I can move ahead on assembly. For this next part, I got a bit ahead of myself and forgot the order these parts needed to be put together. But thankfully the glue hadn't set and I was able to remove the post, which then allowed me to add in the flange. And once that was on, I could then add back the post, followed by the black cover piece. The only thing left to install was the upper post and cup, and once that was in, the assembly was complete. There's one last final touch for this prop, with the addition of this tiny decal. I used a screen grab from the movie to help me recreate this graphic in Illustrator, and then I could cut it out in red outdoor rated vinyl on my vinyl cutter, applied some transfer tape, and then I could apply it to the top of the comlink. And with that, this prop build was done. Now, while this prop may have gotten a bit more screen time than some of the others I've replicated, I think it's still fair enough to call it an obscure Star Wars prop. That's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. But most importantly, go make something.